In the 11th century, England was a kingdom undergoing dramatic change. The Anglo-Saxon era had come to an end with the Norman conquest when William the Conqueror defeated King Harold Godwinson at the Battle of Hastings. This victory established Norman rule over England, bringing a new aristocracy and a deep transformation of English society. However, it also introduced a period of instability that would continue for generations. When William the Conqueror died in 1087, he divided his vast territories between his sons. His eldest son, Robert Curthose, inherited Normandy, while his second son, William Rufus, became King of England. But William Rufus's reign was marked by conflict. His sudden death in 1100, allegedly the result of a hunting accident in the New Forest, created a power vacuum. The circumstances surrounding his death were suspicious, and some believed it was an assassination. Regardless, his younger brother Henry seized the throne before Robert could return from Normandy to stake his claim. To secure his position, he moved quickly to consolidate power, imprisoning his brother Robert and taking control of Normandy. Like any medieval king, Henry understood that securing his dynasty depended on producing a male heir. He married Matilda of Scotland, a descendant of the old Anglo-Saxon royal family, to unite the Norman and Saxon bloodlines. Their union produced a son, William Adelin, whom Henry carefully groomed to inherit both England and Normandy. In 1120, disaster struck. William Adelin, along with many Norman nobles, boarded the White Ship for a routine crossing of the English Channel. What should have been a simple journey turned into catastrophe when the vessel struck a rock and sank. Nearly everyone on board drowned, including the young prince. With his only legitimate son dead, Henry faced a crisis with no clear solution. He had spent decades securing his rule and preparing for a smooth succession. With no other male heir, Henry made an unprecedented decision. He declared his only daughter Matilda his heir and forced his barons to swear an oath recognizing her as the future ruler of England. What followed was nearly 2 decades of civil war, a brutal and chaotic struggle for power that would come to be known as the Anarchy. Matilda was born on February 7, 1102 in Winchester, England, as the eldest child of King Henry I and Queen Matilda of Scotland. From the moment of her birth, she was a princess of both Norman and Anglo-Saxon heritage. Her mother, Matilda of Scotland, was the daughter of King Malcolm III of Scotland and St. Margaret of Wessex, a descendant of the old Anglo-Saxon royal line. This connection to the pre-Norman English monarchy was an important political tool for Henry, as it helped to unite his Norman rule with the native English population. Despite being a princess, Matilda's early years were not marked by the kind of affection or indulgence often associated with royal children. In the medieval world, daughters of kings were primarily seen as political assets, valuable in securing alliances through marriage. From a young age, Matilda had been raised under strict court discipline, learning the skills expected of a noblewoman, diplomacy, and religious devotion. However, as the daughter of one of the most powerful kings in Europe, she also received an education that went beyond the traditional expectations for a medieval princess. Henry ensured that Matilda was well educated, likely providing her with instruction in Latin, the language of diplomacy, and exposing her to the complexities of court politics. Matilda spent much of her early childhood in the English royal court, surrounded by powerful nobles, clerics, and advisors, and as the firstborn child, she would have enjoyed a privileged position. However, her status as Henry's heir was never truly considered. After all, medieval England had never been ruled by a woman. The focus remained on her younger brother, William Adelin, who was born in 1103. As the male heir, William was the central figure in Henry's plans for succession, while Matilda was destined to be used as a diplomatic tool to secure the kingdom's interests abroad. That opportunity came sooner than expected. In 1108, when Matilda was just 6 years old, negotiations began for her to marry Henry V, the Holy Roman Emperor. The match was an ambitious one. The Holy Roman Empire was one of the most powerful states in Europe, stretching from Germany to northern Italy. In 1110, at the age of 8, Matilda was sent to Germany to begin her formal betrothal. Though still a child, she was treated as the future empress and immersed in the culture and governance of the empire. 2 years later, in 1114 at the age of 12, she was officially married to Emperor Henry V in a grand ceremony. Despite her young age, she was expected to take on the role of empress, assisting in court affairs and learning the intricacies of ruling an empire. It was in Germany that Matilda honed her skills in governance, diplomacy, and negotiation, skills that would later prove invaluable when she fought for the English throne. For nearly a decade, Matilda lived as Empress of the Holy Roman Empire, growing into a formidable woman, but her life was about to take another dramatic turn. In 1125, her husband, Henry V, died unexpectedly, leaving her a widow at just 23 years old. Suddenly, her future was uncertain. Though she still held the title of Empress, her position in the empire was no longer secure. She had no children to claim the imperial throne, and without a husband, her role in Germany was limited. With no other choice, Matilda returned to England. By 1120, King Henry's rule over England and Normandy was firmly established. His administrative reforms had strengthened the monarchy, and he had spent years securing his dynasty. His only legitimate son, William Adelin, was central to these plans. Henry had made his nobles swear loyalty to William, ensuring that his succession would be undisputed. But on November 25, 1120, disaster struck. The White Ship, a grand vessel carrying William Adelin and several high-ranking Norman nobles, set sail from Barfleur, Normandy, to England. As the ship departed at night, it struck a submerged rock not far from the harbor. Panic ensued, and within minutes the ship capsized. Nearly all aboard perished, including William Adelin. When news of the disaster reached Henry, he was devastated. His only male heir was gone, and with him the stability of Henry's legacy. Without a clear male successor, England and Normandy faced uncertainty. A kingdom without an undisputed heir invited civil war, noble rebellion, and foreign intervention. Henry needed to act swiftly to secure the succession. With William Adelin gone, Henry had no surviving legitimate son. Though he had numerous illegitimate children, they could not inherit the throne. Left with no other choice, he turned to his daughter Matilda, the only legitimate heir remaining. However, a woman ruling England was unprecedented. Henry had no illusions about the resistance Matilda would face, but he had to ensure his dynasty survived. In 1126, Henry summoned his barons and nobles to court and made them swear an oath recognizing Matilda as his heir. Henry knew that securing Matilda's claim required more than just an oath. She needed a husband who could provide military support and strengthen her position. In 1128, he arranged for her to marry Geoffrey of Anjou, a powerful nobleman from a strategic region in France. Geoffrey Plantagenet was the Count of Anjou, a territory that bordered Normandy. Though this alliance strengthened Henry's hold on Normandy, it was not without problems. Matilda and Geoffrey had a strained relationship from the start. She, a former empress, saw herself as superior in status, while Geoffrey, 10 years younger than her, expected a more traditional marriage dynamic. Despite their differences, their union was politically necessary. In 1133, Matilda gave birth to a son, Henry, securing a future male heir for the dynasty. A second son, Geoffrey, followed in 1134. Henry I now had a grandson, and the continuation of his bloodline seemed assured. However, tensions between Matilda and Geoffrey persisted, and at times she remained separate from him in Normandy. In late 1135, King Henry I fell seriously ill while in Normandy. According to chroniclers, he suffered from food poisoning after eating a meal of lampreys. His condition worsened quickly, and by December 1, 1135, the king was dead. His passing marked the end of nearly 35 years of rule, but instead of a peaceful transition, it plunged England into uncertainty. At the time of Henry's death, Matilda was in Normandy, possibly at her husband's court in Anjou. Her absence from England at such a critical moment was a severe disadvantage. She had expected the nobles to honor their oath and recognize her as queen, but many of them had never truly supported her claim. Her gender, combined with her marriage to a foreign count, made her an unpopular choice among the English barons. Seizing the opportunity, Matilda's cousin Stephen of Blois acted swiftly. Stephen, a grandson of William the Conqueror, had been one of the nobles who swore loyalty to Matilda, but with Henry gone, he saw his chance. While Matilda remained in Normandy, Stephen crossed the English Channel and rode to London. With the backing of the church and key nobles, he had himself crowned King of England before Matilda could respond. The oaths sworn to Matilda were broken. Stephen now sat on the throne, and England belonged to him. But Matilda would not accept this betrayal. The kingdom was about to descend into the anarchy. Soon, England stood on the brink of collapse as rival factions prepared for war. Unlike Matilda, Stephen was a male ruler with strong ties to the English aristocracy, and his charismatic nature helped him gain allies. However, he still needed the ultimate seal of legitimacy, the approval of the Pope. In 1136, Stephen sent envoys to Pope Innocent II, seeking official recognition of his kingship. Despite having sworn loyalty to Matilda, the English Church now saw Stephen as a preferable choice. Pope Innocent, eager to maintain stability and prevent further disputes, granted his blessing to Stephen's reign. With papal support, Stephen's claim to the throne was further solidified, making it even harder for Matilda to challenge him. Despite his early success, Stephen's rule was far from secure. Many of England's powerful nobles had only reluctantly accepted his kingship, and discontent simmered beneath the surface. The kingdom was still divided, and Matilda's supporters were preparing for resistance. The first major threat to Stephen's reign came from Robert of Gloucester, one of the most powerful noblemen in England and Matilda's half-brother. Born out of wedlock, Robert was Henry's illegitimate son, but had been one of his most trusted allies. After Henry's death, Robert initially supported Stephen, but as the new king's rule grew weaker, he turned against him. By 1138, Robert of Gloucester openly rebelled against Stephen, declaring his loyalty to Matilda. His stronghold in the west of England became a center of resistance. He allied with Ranulph of Chester and other dissatisfied barons, raising an army to challenge Stephen's rule. Meanwhile, Matilda was preparing for her own return to England. In September 1139, Matilda finally made her move. She landed on the south coast of England, accompanied by her half-brother Robert of Gloucester and a small force of knights. Her goal was to rally her supporters and take the throne by force. She sought refuge at Arundel Castle, a strategically placed fortress held by Adelicia of Louvain, the widow of Henry I. Stephen acted quickly, marching south with his army to besiege Arundel. However, in an unexpected move, he allowed Matilda to leave the castle unharmed. Some historians suggest that Adelicia negotiated Matilda's safe passage, while others believe Stephen saw little threat in Matilda at this stage. He may have also feared looking dishonorable by attacking his cousin directly. Instead, he allowed her to travel to Bristol, where Robert of Gloucester's forces awaited her. From her new base in Bristol, Matilda established her court and began strengthening her forces. Over the next 2 years, the conflict escalated into a full-blown civil war. Robert of Gloucester and Ranulph of Chester had been launching attacks in the north, and Stephen was forced to respond. In early February 1141, he marched to the city of Lincoln, where Ranulph had taken control of the castle. What Stephen did not realize was that Matilda's forces were preparing a large counterattack. On February 2, 1141, the forces of Empress Matilda and King Stephen clashed in the Battle of Lincoln, one of the most decisive confrontations of the anarchy. Stephen, having besieged Lincoln Castle, found himself in a precarious position. Matilda's allies, led by Robert of Gloucester and Ranulph of Chester, had gathered a large army and marched to relieve the city. Despite being warned of their approach, Stephen refused to abandon his siege. Confident in his knights and personal strength, he chose to stand and fight. As the battle began, Robert of Gloucester's forces charged into Stephen's ranks, overwhelming them with sheer numbers. The fighting was fierce, and soon Stephen found himself isolated in the midst of the battlefield. Rather than retreat, he fought with great bravery, wielding his massive battle axe, cutting down enemies around him. However, his knights were overwhelmed, and as the battle turned against him, Stephen's axe shattered in his hands. With no weapon left, he was finally surrounded and captured. With Stephen taken prisoner, Matilda had won her greatest victory. The captured king was sent to Bristol, where he was imprisoned. Now Matilda had a clear path to the throne, and her forces marched toward Winchester and London to claim her crown. Despite Stephen's capture, the war was not over. One of Stephen's most powerful allies remained free, Henry of Blois, the Bishop of Winchester and Stephen's brother. Henry was a shrewd and politically influential figure, holding immense power as the papal legate in England. At first, Henry seemed willing to negotiate with Matilda. As Bishop of Winchester, he controlled the royal treasury and the church's backing, both of which were essential for any ruler's legitimacy. In March 1141, Matilda met Henry in Winchester, where he initially acknowledged her as Lady of the English, a step toward her coronation. However, Matilda made a crucial mistake. Instead of securing Henry's full loyalty, she alienated him and many nobles by acting as if she had already won the war. She dismissed several of Stephen's supporters, refused to compromise with the church, and made it clear that she would rule as queen in her own right, not merely as Stephen's replacement. Realizing that Matilda's rule could threaten the church's influence, Henry of Blois turned against her and began rallying Stephen's remaining supporters. His decision would soon lead to Matilda's greatest setback, the rout of Winchester. In September 1141, Matilda moved to Winchester, attempting to secure the city and solidify her rule. However, Henry of Blois had already mobilized an army, reinforcing the city's defenses and cutting off Matilda's supply lines. Seeing an opportunity, Henry called for Stephen's loyalists, and a combined force of Flemish mercenaries and Angevin defectors besieged Matilda's army within Winchester. The situation quickly turned against her. Realizing she was trapped, Matilda ordered a hasty retreat, but what followed was a disastrous rout. Matilda barely managed to escape with her life. However, her half-brother Robert of Gloucester was not so lucky. He was captured by Stephen's forces, creating a crisis for Matilda. Stephen's supporters now had a bargaining chip. In November 1141, Matilda was forced into a prisoner exchange, releasing Stephen in return for Robert of Gloucester. This single act reversed her greatest victory. Stephen was free, and the war continued. With Stephen restored to power, Matilda had lost momentum, and Stephen sought to strike a decisive blow. In late 1142, he turned his attention to Oxford, where Matilda had taken refuge in Oxford Castle. Stephen's army surrounded the castle, cutting off all supplies. As winter set in, Matilda's forces began to starve, and it seemed that her capture was inevitable. However, in one of the most daring escapes of the war, Matilda defied all odds. On a bitterly cold December night, Matilda and a small group of loyal knights dressed in white cloaks to blend into the snow-covered landscape. Under the cover of darkness, they silently make their way across the frozen Thames. Matilda successfully escaped to Wallingford, evading capture once again. Despite Matilda's daring escape from Oxford, the war remained deadlocked. Both she and Stephen had suffered victories and defeats, but neither could secure total dominance over England. The conflict had now devolved into a prolonged struggle, with shifting alliances, castle sieges, and raids across the countryside. Matilda's base of power remained in the west of England, with strongholds in Bristol, Gloucester, and Devizes, while Stephen controlled London and the southeast. While Matilda fought in England, her husband Geoffrey of Anjou had been steadily working to conquer Normandy. By 1144, Geoffrey had successfully captured Rouen, effectively securing Normandy for Matilda's family. This was a major victory. It meant that Matilda's son Henry now had a stronghold in France and a legitimate claim to the Duchy of Normandy. However, despite this success, Geoffrey showed little interest in intervening directly in England. He preferred to consolidate his rule in Normandy, leaving Matilda to fight her battles alone. By 1147, the tide of the war had turned against Matilda. Many of her most powerful supporters had either died, grown weary of the conflict, or sought peace. Robert of Gloucester, her most loyal commander and half-brother, died in 1147, leaving a huge gap in her leadership. Without his military skill and political influence, Matilda's position weakened significantly. At the same time, her resources were dwindling. The ongoing war had exhausted her finances, and support from the barons was declining. Recognizing that her chances of ruling England were slipping away, Matilda made a critical decision. In 1148, She left England and returned to Normandy, effectively abandoning her claim to the English throne. She settled in Rouen, focusing on securing her son Henry's future rather than her own. Though her personal ambitions had failed, her son's rise to power would soon change the course of history. With Matilda gone, the hopes of her supporters now rested on her son Henry Fitz-Empress, the future Henry II of England. By the late 1140s, Henry was emerging as a capable leader. In 1149, he crossed into England and attempted to rally support, but his efforts were premature, and he returned to Normandy. Meanwhile, Stephen's rule remained unstable. Though Matilda was gone, the war had devastated England, and Stephen struggled to maintain control. His greatest hope for securing his dynasty lay in his son Eustace, whom he sought to have crowned as his successor. By 1153, England was still ravaged by the Anarchy. Henry Fitz-Empress was now ready to challenge Stephen directly. Unlike his mother, Henry had spent years building his power base. As Duke of Normandy, Count of Anjou and heir to the Angevin lands, he commanded vast resources and had proven himself a skilled leader. In January 1153, Henry landed in England with a small but disciplined army, determined to seize the throne. His forces were not large enough for outright conquest, but he carried something even more powerful, the support of many disillusioned barons. Rather than launching a direct assault on Stephen, Henry moved strategically. He traveled across England, securing pledges of loyalty from key nobles, reinforcing castles and avoiding major battles. Stephen's last hope for securing his dynasty rested on his son Eustace, who was eager to continue the fight. However, in August, Eustace died suddenly, possibly from illness or poisoning. His death was a devastating blow to Stephen. With no strong heir to inherit his claim, many of his remaining supporters lost faith in a war. The loss of Eustace, combined with Henry's growing power, forced Stephen to reconsider his position. After nearly 2 decades of civil war, he recognized that continued fighting would only further weaken the kingdom. Later that year, Stephen and Henry met at Wallingford, where they negotiated a peace settlement, the Treaty of Wallingford. Under its terms, Stephen would remain king for the rest of his life. Henry would be recognized as Stephen's heir and succeed him upon his death. With this treaty, the war effectively ended and the anarchy. Though Stephen retained the throne, it was now only a matter of time before Henry took control. On October 25, 1154, Stephen died, marking the end of his troubled reign. As per the treaty, Henry Fitz-Empress was declared King Henry II of England. Henry's rise marked the beginning of the Angevin Empire, a vast domain stretching from England to Normandy and Anjou. Though Matilda had never ruled England as queen, her son's victory ensured that her bloodline would define England's future. In her later years, Matilda's health began to decline. By 1167, she had largely withdrawn from political life, spending most of her time in Rouen, where she had established her court. On September 10, 1167, Empress Matilda passed away at the age of 65. She was buried in Rouen Cathedral. Though she never wore the English crown, her son's reign as Henry II marked the beginning of the Plantagenet dynasty, one of the most powerful in English history.